Good morning. Live from the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center, we're live on NASA television awaiting the back out of Space Shuttle Enterprise, the very first ever space shuttle, which has been maintained as part of the National Collection. As we prepared for that, we are watching video that has been taken by NASA television over the last several days as we prepared to bring Space Shuttle Discovery to the National Air and Space Museum. News media are gathered here at the Air and Space Museum's Udvar-Hazy Center and awaiting Enterprise. Enterprise will be backed out and moved on to a cement pathway behind a stage where it will join its fellow orbiter Space Shuttle Discovery for a ceremony that will begin here at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, live on NASA television, at which time NASA will turn over Discovery to the National Air and Space Museum. Space Shuttle Enterprise was the very first ever space shuttle. It was originally named the Constitution in honor of the U.S. Constitution's bicentennial, but after a public campaign from a number of fans of the Star Trek television show, it was renamed Enterprise. Even though Enterprise never flew in space, it was an important part of the history of NASA and the Space Shuttle Program. The work that the astronaut crews Fred Hayes, Gordon Fullerton, Joe Engle, and Dick Truly did to conduct approach and landing tests was integral in determining the flight capabilities and the landing feasibility of the space shuttle before Columbia flew on its first flight in 1981. In preparation for the delivery of Space Shuttle Discovery to the National Air and Space Museum's Udvar-Hazy Center, NASA's shuttle aircraft, designated NASA 905, was flown from the West Coast to the East Coast. It was based at the Dryden Flight Research Facility. It flew across country on its way to Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And here we see NASA 905 taxiing in preparation for its flight. Wheels up and on its way to Florida. The shuttle carrier aircraft have been in use for many years, shuttling and ferrying space shuttles across the country following shuttle landings at the Edwards Air Force Base. And here we see the shuttle carrier aircraft on final approach at Kennedy Space Center. It taxied up and awaited the arrival of Space Shuttle Discovery, which had been housed in the Vehicle Assembly Building. Discovery was rolled to the mate-demate device, where it was placed on a sling, lifted above the ground, and awaited the arrival of the shuttle carrier aircraft to be taxied underneath. Here we see the shuttle carrier aircraft as it makes its way directly on the center line to be placed and spotted for attachment of Discovery. Here we see the workers carefully ensuring that everything is lined up. Discovery was attached at the same points that the external tank attached when she flew in space. And here Discovery is making her final flight from Kennedy Space Center aloft and about to begin a flyover of the Space Coast for residents and workers to take one final look before she headed to Washington, D.C. The aircraft flew at about 15,000 feet en route to the Washington, D.C. area. Here it's making a low flyover of the beach near Cocoa Beach. And you can see residents on the beach taking pictures. One last look. Discovery arrived in the nation's capital on Tuesday and made a spectacular fly around the National Mall and other historic monuments, the National Harbor, the White House, the Washington Monument. Thousands and thousands of Washington, D.C. residents came out, stopped their cars along the roads, thronged along bridges. It was an amazing sight, something that had not been seen in Washington since Space Shuttle Enterprise arrived in the mid-'80s. Here's the nation's Capitol building. The flyover took more than an hour, and the pilots and their engineers did a spectacular job of ensuring that as many people as possible in the area of Washington, D.C. were able to see the Space Shuttle Discovery one last time airborne. And here it's making its landing at Washington's Dulles International Airport. This occurred at 11:05 a.m. on Tuesday. The shuttle carrier aircraft, piloted by Jeff Moultrie and Bill Reiki, rolled to a stop. And overnight, Space Shuttle Discovery was lifted off of the shuttle carrier aircraft, and it will be towed to the same area where Enterprise will be for the ceremony that begins at 11 a.m. Enterprise was the very first space shuttle built. It was commissioned actually during the Apollo era, the formation of the Shuttle Program. It was constructed, and here we see cast members of the Star Trek television series as Constitution was renamed Enterprise. The shuttle was involved in very important work early on, proving that it could be attached to a shuttle carrier aircraft, that it was stable in flight, that it could be carried across the country. Here it is detached from the shuttle carrier aircraft to begin a free flight with pilots at the controls, making a landing at the dry lake bed at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Once again proving the capability of the shuttle to land as a glider, a massive vehicle that could fly into space and land as a glider. These approach and landing tests conducted before the first shuttle flight in the late 80s were very important to the success of the Space Shuttle Program. Once the important work of Enterprise was done, she was retired to the National Collection at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., here at the Udvar-Hazy Center. And here we see Enterprise being rolled into the hangar, where in just a few minutes she will roll back out. When Discovery is moved into the hangar, Enterprise will make its way back over to Dulles International Airport and be placed atop the shuttle carrier aircraft for a ferry flight to New York City. Enterprise has been here for many years and has served as a tool to educate and inspire hundreds of thousands of people. And we're back live, awaiting the rollback of Enterprise out of the hangar. Once again, Enterprise will greet her sister ship Discovery for a ceremony that will be carried live on NASA television this morning at 11 a.m. Enterprise will be going to the Sea, Air, and Space Museum, the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in New York, a fabulous museum facility in its own right. Initially, the shuttle will be ferried to New York City to John F. Kennedy International Airport and will remain there while an elaborate set of cranes that were used to offload Shuttle Discovery from the shuttle carrier aircraft overnight will be disassembled and carried to New York and reassembled on the airport tarmac there for the offload of Enterprise. And here we see first movement as the tail cone of Shuttle Enterprise is moving out of the hangar at the Udvar-Hazy Center. Enterprise is being pushed by a tug similar to those that push back commercial airliners from the gates that many of you are familiar with. This is a practice that has been used at Kennedy Space Center for moving space shuttles around between buildings for many years. Workers from NASA and United Space Alliance have been here in the Washington, D.C. over the last year helping to prepare Enterprise for this ferry flight to New York, ensuring that it has the structural integrity to withstand a ferry flight atop the shuttle carrier aircraft, which is a modified Boeing 747. She checked out fine and has been certified for the flight. Backing the Enterprise out of the hangar is a slow, meticulous process because the vertical stabilizer that extends into the air is taller than the normal opening of the door, and there's a cutout section that is visible through which the vertical stabilizer will pass very carefully. So this is a slow process until Enterprise is backed completely out of the hangar. While Enterprise never flew in space, her approach and landing tests and capture flights were very important to learning more about the shuttle, and she also made a number of other flights on top of the shuttle carrier aircraft. During May and June of 1983, Enterprise was ferried to the Paris, France air show, as well as to Germany, Italy, England, and Canada, and then was returned to the Dryden Flight Research Facility. And in the April through October 1984 time period, Enterprise was ferried to Vandenberg Air Force Base in California and to Mobile, Alabama, and from there taken by barge to New Orleans for the U.S. 1984 World's Fair.
No, nothing. I got two.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
I think we'll get especially slow to make sure they have the...
In NASA nomenclature, all of the Space Shuttle orbiters received an orbiter vehicle number, and Enterprise was orbiter vehicle, or OV-101, and of course still remains OV-101. And as all of the shuttles were constructed and built and turned over to NASA, they also came with a title, similar to a car title, but slightly more expensive. Space Shuttle Discovery, which also is here on the ground in the Washington, D.C. area, is OV-103. Once Enterprise OV-101 is backed out of the hangar and towed to place behind a stage where a ceremony will be conducted later this morning, Discovery will make the same journey from the opposite direction, and the two shuttles, OV-101 Enterprise and OV-103 Discovery, will be joined nose to nose as a backdrop to this magnificent celebration that will occur in the nation's capital as NASA turns over Space Shuttle Discovery to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center. And here we see the setting for the celebration that will occur later today. Welcome, Discovery. The crew of the National Air and Space Museum has worked hard to plan an event that will be memorable for all those in attendance and all those watching on NASA television. And while the Space Shuttle orbiters no longer will be flying, they will continue their mission to inspire and educate as thousands and thousands of people from around the world have an opportunity to learn from what they have accomplished in museums across the country. Here in Washington, D.C. at the National Air and Space Museum, in New York City at the Intrepid Sea Air and Space Museum, in California at the California Science Center, where Space Shuttle Endeavour will go later this year, and at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, where Space Shuttle Atlantis will be on display. Once again, Enterprise will be making her way to New York City to the Intrepid Sea Air and Space Museum within the next several days, weather permitting. And we see the vertical stabilizer lofting up in the air and clearing its way past the vertical slit in the opening above the main entryway to the space hangar. A proud moment as the American flag and clearly marked the United States Space Shuttle Enterprise exits the hangar at the National Air and Space Museum Udvar-Hazy Center, where she has been on display for many years, making way for Space Shuttle Discovery. Majestic sight, a Space Shuttle orbiter. The main landing gear are rolling back. Shuttle Enterprise has a tail cone affixed, covering up where main engines would be, and this will enable more stability and airworthiness once she is mounted to the top of the shuttle carrier aircraft and making her flight to New York City. There we see the tail cone. It's a massive structure in many pieces that take some time to assemble. A very experienced workforce from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida has been here, consisting of NASA and contractor workers, to prepare Enterprise for today and for the next several days as she is lifted by crane to the top of the shuttle carrier aircraft and prepared for the flight to the John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City. A beautiful view head-on of Enterprise as she has completed backing out of the hangar and will begin to transit a short distance to the location where she will be parked in preparation for today's ceremony. Once again, this massive aircraft that weighs in the vicinity of 160 to 175,000 pounds is able to be moved with a tug, a commercial tug that would be the same you would find at any airport across America. Space shuttles are iconic, very distinctive, unlike any other aircraft. And they all have stories to tell, and those stories will be told in the museums where they will be located following their retirement. The space shuttles collectively, over 30 years in the program, deployed communication satellites, the Hubble Space Telescope, repaired satellites, constructed the International Space Station, docked to the Russian Mir station, were the location for scientific test beds, and helped the United States maintain its leadership in space. A leadership role that continues as NASA turns to the future and is working on constructing the largest rocket ever that will take American astronauts farther into space than ever before. Space Shuttle Enterprise, Orbiter Vehicle 101, making a slow roll to her location here behind the stage at the Udvar-Hazy Center. Thousands and thousands of visitors are anticipated to attend the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center today for this Welcome Discovery Festival. It kicks off a several-day festival of educational activities, learning experiences, and an opportunity to see Space Shuttle Enterprise and Space Shuttle Discovery nose to nose. And NASA Television will be carrying all the key activities today. NASA's Associate Administrator for Human Exploration and Operations, William Gerstenmaier, will be on NASA Television between 10:30 and 11 today, talking about his experiences in the Space Shuttle program and working with and managing many of the aspects of the shuttle program, and talking about the people with whom he's worked, the amazing workforce that constructed, maintained, and prepared each shuttle for flight, the teams that operated mission control in Houston, the teams that trained the astronauts, and the astronauts themselves. And then at 11 o'clock this morning, the official ceremony will kick off with a host of VIPs and throngs of attendees. The event is open to the public, and once again will be carried live on NASA television. Looking at the windows close up on Space Shuttle Enterprise, here's a team of United Space Alliance workers who have been here in the Washington, D.C. area helping to prepare Enterprise and to prepare Discovery. And they will be here again for several more days to prepare Enterprise to fly to New York City. United Space Alliance, the prime contractor for NASA's Space Shuttle Program. This is the vertical stabilizer. Which can expand with speed brake to slow the shuttle upon landing. It's a marvelous machine. The Space Shuttle is the first ever reusable spacecraft, and when it was in flight prior to its retirement last year, virtually all elements were reusable except for the external tank, the large orange structure that contained the liquid propellant that fed the shuttle's main engines. Both the shuttle orbiter itself and the solid rocket boosters, the twin boosters attached to the sides of the external tank, were recovered and reused for every flight. There were 135 Space Shuttle missions. None of which could have happened without the important research that was conducted by this Space Shuttle orbiter here, Space Shuttle Enterprise. Here comes Enterprise passing the Welcome Discovery sign, a prelude to the two orbiters nose to nose. There have only been very few occasions when space shuttles have rolled at the same time and been so near each other as they will be today, and never before in the nation's capital. The two shuttles will remain nose to nose until about 4 p.m. when Enterprise will back up. Discovery will roll into its hangar for permanent display, and Enterprise will make its way to Dulles International Airport in preparation to be lifted to the shuttle carrier aircraft and sent to its new home at the Intrepid Sea, Air and Space Museum in New York. A slow, safe roll to ensure that everything goes well as the workers from NASA, the National Air and Space Museum, and United Space Alliance roll Space Shuttle Enterprise into place for today's ceremony. A beautiful sight in the early morning sunshine in Washington, D.C. as Enterprise is lit up, having seen the light of day for the first time in many, many years. Weather permitting, Enterprise will be affixed to the top of the shuttle carrier aircraft over the next several days and is planned to make its flight to New York City on Monday, April 23rd. Weather forecasters in the Washington area are not predicting pristine weather, however, over the next few days, so those operations will be scheduled to avoid any inclement weather or unsafe weather, and it will make the flight to New York when that work is done, whether it occurs on Monday or not. But as of now, that is the schedule, and NASA expects that that will be maintained until we know otherwise, till we learn otherwise. Enterprise, again, was the very first space shuttle, followed by Columbia, Challenger, Discovery, Atlantis, and Endeavour. The birthday of Enterprise, when she was rolled out of her assembly facility at Rockwell's Air Force Plant 42 in Palmdale, California, was September 17th, 1976. The 9-month-long approach and landing test program was conducted from February through November 1977 at the Dryden Flight Research Facility, and it demonstrated that the orbiter could fly in the atmosphere and land like an airplane, except without power. It was a large glider. Some were not confident in its aerodynamic capabilities, but it proved itself on several occasions and set the stage for moving ahead with the Space Shuttle Program and what was to become the first ever launch on April 12th, 1981. There are a number of NASA astronauts and former astronauts who will be here in attendance today, making their way around the space shuttles. They'll be a part of the ceremony as well. One of the attendees will be one of the original pilots of Enterprise for the approach and landing tests, Joe Engle. Joe also flew Space Shuttle Discovery, the only person to have flown both of the space shuttles that will be here in place today. And Space Shuttle Enterprise is positioned for today's Welcome Discovery ceremony. Enterprise will be greeting her sister ship nose to nose for a ceremony that will be carried live on NASA television at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Along with Joe Engle, Dick Truly, Fred Hayes, and Gordon Fullerton all flew the 5 approach and landing test flights that helped demonstrate the ability of the space shuttle to descend and land safely on the runway like a glider. A number of dignitaries and guests will be in attendance today. A number of people who have worked on the Space Shuttle program over the years. Astronauts typically are seen wearing their blue flight jackets or blue flight suits. And we have seen this morning one person already around the aircraft, and that was Joe Engle, one of the original pilots for the approach and landing tests. With Enterprise in place, the crowd is gathering. It's a majestic sight, especially to be that close to a space shuttle orbiter. It's hard to get a true grasp of the size of the ship unless you are privileged enough to be close to it. And it is amazing to realize that the space shuttle is launched vertically like a rocket, maneuvered meticulously through space, docked with other spacecraft while both the shuttle and those spacecraft were traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, and then performed a braking burn to deorbit and within an hour back on the ground, having descended and slowed down from 17,500 miles an hour to 0 right on the center line of a runway. An amazing spaceship, an amazing accomplishment of American ingenuity, one that will be carried on with the next generation of spacecraft. And here we see the setup for the program that will be carried live on NASA television later. Enterprise is in place. To the right of the screen, Discovery's nose will move in place. The stage is set. The transfer of Discovery to the National Air and Space Museum will occur later today. Once again, that ceremony will begin at 11 Eastern on NASA television. So with Space Shuttle Enterprise, the very first space shuttle ever built and the first to fly in the atmosphere, in place for our ceremony today, and with Space Shuttle Discovery having been removed from the shuttle carrier aircraft and put on its landing gear for the final time at 4:30 a.m. today, Discovery will be rolled into place, nose to nose with Enterprise, and NASA television will be back with live coverage of today's Welcome Discovery ceremony, live from the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And this concludes NASA television's coverage of Space Shuttle Enterprise backing out from the Udvar-Hazy Center and put in place. Once again, we'll be back with live coverage of the ceremony to welcome Discovery at 11 a.m. Eastern Time.